You're not family. You're a financial burden. They thought I'd stay silent. They forgot I kept the paper.
The smell of baked ham still hung in the kitchen. Snow flurried outside the window like sifted sugar, catching the glow of the Christmas lights. I had just set my coffee on the table when my grandson, my own flesh and blood, dropped a thick envelope beside my plate. The sound it made was sharp, like a gavel. He pushed it toward me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Merry Christmas, Grandpa. Time to settle up." Inside the envelope was the mortgage payment. Not a gift, not gratitude, a bill. And then, like it was nothing, he said, "You're not family anymore. You're a burden." You won't believe what I did next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is Richard Palmer. I'm 69 years old. I live just outside Green Bay, Wisconsin. If you've ever stood on the Fox River Bridge at night, you know how the water below carries the sound of the city like a quiet hymn. Trucks rumble across frozen roads. Church bells drift from St. Anne's steeple even when the wind bites your ears. That bridge has held me through more winters than I can count, and that morning it held me again as I drove away from the house I'd built for a boy who no longer saw me as family. The steering wheel felt slick beneath my gloves, damp from the snow I hadn't brushed off completely. The radio was on, but low, just static whispers and a faint Christmas song cutting in and out, each verse stabbed in its own quiet way. It wasn't supposed to end like this. Family isn't supposed to turn you into a stranger over breakfast. I'd raised that boy after his father, my only son, was killed in a snowstorm when the boy was 8. It was one of those black ice nights where the world shifts from routine to tragedy in a blink. I'd buried my son with trembling hands, then stood there looking at a small boy with 2 big eyes and no father left. I promised him I would never leave him, that I would make sure he was cared for. So I worked nights at the post office, long bone-chilling shifts, sorting mail until my back screamed. Days I built houses with my own hands, hammering nails with frozen fingers. I patched drywall, laid shingles, hauled lumber. I came home smelling of sawdust and sweat. Sometimes he'd wait up for me, sitting on the couch in pajamas too short for his growing legs. "Grandpa, did you bring me something?" Often it was just a stamp or an old envelope, but he'd light up like I'd given him treasure. When he turned 25, he wanted to buy his first home. He had that same fire in his eyes his dad once had, but the bank laughed at him. No credit, no savings, no chance. I can still remember the shame on his face as we left the branch that day. So I co-signed, used my retirement lump sum, took out a home equity loan on my own little place. "Just until you're on your feet," I said. He hugged me, then tight, desperate, grateful. Promised me he'd pay me back, promised I could live with him until I passed. That was 5 years ago. The betrayal didn't arrive in one loud thunderclap. It crept in like a slow, silent frost. First came the clothes. He started dressing different. Tailored jackets, polished boots. Stopped calling me Grandpa at home. Then one day at a dinner party with friends, I heard him call me Rick. Rick. It felt small at first, harmless. But it wasn't harmless. It was distance. Then came the quiet, deliberate moves. Mail that used to arrive at the house began going to a P.O. box. He forgot to copy me on mortgage statements. I noticed my name slowly vanishing from envelopes. One afternoon, a thick letter arrived by mistake. Refinancing paperwork. His signature only. No mention of me. No notice. I stood there on the porch, paper trembling in my hand, cold air burning my lungs. When I asked, he waved me off. "It's just paperwork, Grandpa. Don't worry about it." But I'd worked too long in the post office to believe that. I know the weight of paper. I know how a signature can change a life. In America, a county clerk's stamp can erase decades of sweat and sacrifice with one press. Christmas Day was his final cut. Not an argument, Not a fight. Just a sentence. Clean and sharp. You're not family. You're a burden. I drove away from that house with the envelope still in my coat pocket. Didn't even open it until I was halfway across the Fox River Bridge. I pulled over, hands shaking so hard the gear shift rattled. Snow clung to the guardrail like frost-bitten lace. Inside the envelope were the mortgage statements, page after page of numbers, and a single note in his handwriting. This is my house now. Find somewhere else to go. I stared at the words until they blurred. My breath fogged the glass. I could hear the ice under the bridge creak and pop in the cold. I drove to a BP station on Broadway, parked under the buzzing fluorescent lights. The smell of burnt coffee and gasoline drifted in as I cracked the window. I just sat there with the heater humming, trying to remember how to breathe. I thought of every extra shift I'd worked at the post office. Every time I'd stayed late hauling drywall when my body begged me to quit. Every lunch I'd packed for him when his dad was gone. Every sacrifice my late wife, his grandmother, had made to keep him clothed, fed, and warm. I also remembered one other thing, a quiet meeting years ago with a lawyer, the day we closed on that house. He'd explained a special clause in the contract, one the boy never paid attention to. A clause that, if triggered, could change everything. I went home that night to my small apartment. The place felt even smaller, but warm enough. I pulled the metal lockbox from under my bed. It was old, scratched, edges dented from years of moving. Inside were pieces of a life, my wife's wedding ring, my old postal badge, and a manila folder marked in my shaky handwriting, Deed, Joint, Clause. I sat at the kitchen table until midnight, reading every line. Yellow highlighters streaked across legal jargon. I traced every trigger point, every repayment term. My hands trembled at first, but slowly, as the night stretched on, they steadied. It was like loading a weapon, deliberate, calm. He thought I was soft, thought age made me blind. But 32 years as a mailman had taught me that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it's an envelope. Sometimes it's a signature. Sometimes it's silence. And now it was my turn to deliver. The next morning the sky was pale silver, the kind of winter light that feels thin but merciless. Snow had stopped. Sun broke through thin clouds and made the highway shimmer like a sheet of glass. I took the long way, past the Fox River, past St. Norbert's College, where I'd once taken the boy to summer soccer camp. Every landmark was a ghost, every mile a memory. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was awake. I parked outside my lawyer's office on Washington Street, a small brick building that had seen better days. Inside smelled like coffee and old books. He'd been my lawyer since that first mortgage cosign. A man with sharp eyes and a calm voice. I laid the folder on his desk. "It's time," I said. He flipped through the papers slowly, his fingers leaving faint smudges on the yellowed edges. He looked up at me, eyebrow raised. "You're sure about this?" I nodded once. "Okay," he said finally, leaning back in his chair. "Then let's do this right." We spent hours drafting notices, certified letters, filed a motion with the Brown County clerk to enforce the repayment clause. The house was technically mine again under default conditions. He had missed 3 informal repayments. The automatic reversion was triggered. The boy had no idea. He thought Grandpa had no teeth. But Grandpa's teeth were made of signatures, stamps, and dates. That week was quiet but heavy with purpose. While the boy posted pictures on Facebook of his new leather couch, I sat at my kitchen table printing affidavits. While he hosted parties, I collected receipts. While he joked to his friends that I was too old to understand modern finance, I was building a paper fortress around him. I didn't yell. I didn't call. I didn't even show up at his door. I just prepared. Because in America, silence isn't surrender. Silence is a storm, gathering strength. The next time I saw him was at the credit union. He stood in line ahead of me, polished and preened, dressed like some glossy magazine version of success. a fitted wool coat that tapered perfectly at the waist, shiny brown loafers that reflected the fluorescent lights, Bluetooth earpiece blinking faint blue against his jaw. His hair was slicked back, his posture easy, one hand tucked in his pocket like he owned the place. He didn't see me, didn't glance back, not once. But I saw the slip of paper he handed the teller, a cashier's check. The moment was quick, just a flicker of movement as he slid the check across the counter, but my eyes caught the name printed on it. I knew it instantly. He was moving money again, which meant he was still using our house as leverage, except it wasn't ours anymore. Not if the clerk stamped those filings the way my lawyer and I had requested. Not if the clause we'd invoked was already breathing life behind the scenes. Later that week, my attorney called. His voice was brisk but calm, the way men sound when they've been in this game for decades. "It's moving fast, Rick," he said. "You'll have a court date by early next month. I'll need copies of all deposits made to the joint repayment account." I sat at my kitchen table with the phone pressed to my ear. My old apartment smelled faintly of dust and coffee grounds. The winter light came in thin and cold across the counter. "Give me a second," I said. I reached down and pulled the old accordion folder from under the table. It was worn soft from years of being dragged in and out of drawers, the same one I'd kept pay stubs in back when I was still walking postal routes. Inside, the pages crackled like dry leaves. I flipped through them slowly. There were only 5 entries, 5 deposits in nearly 5 years, each one spaced months apart. Tiny, insulting, barely more than a gesture. The totals added up to just over $3,000. He was supposed to repay me $52,000. The clause required a minimum of $1,000 a month. He had made 5 small payments and then silence. The rest, excuses, delays, emergencies. "You'll get it later, Grandpa." I had let it slide because I wanted peace, because I didn't want to be the man who took his own grandson to court, because I thought kindness might be enough to keep a family whole. But now I could see it for what it was. Control, a quiet manipulation, a bet that time and age would wear me down before the paperwork caught up. He was never planning to pay me back. He was just waiting me out. He assumed I would die before it mattered. I remembered January, when my knees first started giving out. Stairs had become enemies. Every step felt like nails driving into the bone. I asked if I could move into the downstairs guest room instead of climbing up to the attic every night. He looked up from his phone, barely pausing. "That's already set up for guests," he said. "You can figure it out for a while." So I figured it out. I slept on the pull-out couch in the den for 4 weeks, my body screaming with each cold dawn. He never asked if I was comfortable. He never asked if I was okay. Then there was the furnace. One night in February, it quit. The temperature inside dropped to 9 degrees, the kind of cold that gets into your bones and refuses to leave. I wrapped myself in 2 blankets and sat by the oven with the door open, the weak heat brushing my knees. I drank lukewarm coffee and watched my breath hang in the air like smoke. He came home late, keys jingling, boots wet with snow, saw me there hunched by the stove. "You could have just called someone," he said. No apology, no concern, just a reminder that the house was no longer mine to decide anything in. Funny thing is, that night, I didn't need heat. Not really. I needed respect. After the certified letters went out, silence followed. No phone call, no knock at my door, no mention of it to family. I braced for a confrontation, maybe shouting, maybe tears. But what I got instead was colder. A single notice appeared on the fridge one morning. Typed, no signature. "Please vacate the premises by March 1st. That was it. No, thank you. No, I'm sorry. Just an eviction notice as sterile as a bank statement. I kept that paper. Slid it into the folder right behind the mortgage documents. One more nail in the coffin he was quietly building for himself. I flashed back to the day we moved into that house. He was 25. I was 63. The grass was still raw dirt and seed. The air smelled like fresh paint and damp lumber. We planted the tree in the front yard together, a small oak sapling I'd dug up from my old place in Wapaka. He grinned at me, sweat on his forehead, dirt on his hands. Our legacy, he called it. 2 years later, without asking, he trimmed it down to half its size, tossed the branches in the trash. That's how it always went. I planted. He cut. I spent February quietly preparing. I moved everything that mattered, and there wasn't much. I transferred my Social Security, direct deposit to a different bank, switched my Medicare info, got a P.O. box, packed the few things I owned that still held meaning, my wife's hand-stitched quilts, my father's old wrench set, the little Sears shoebox where I'd kept every birthday card for the last 20 years. It turns out when people stop seeing you as family, you don't take up much space. Everything fit neatly into the back seat of my Chevy Impala. One trip, no trailer, no moving truck. March 1st came. I was gone by sunrise. The air was brittle cold, sky pale and empty. Frost painted the edges of the Impala's windows as I loaded the last box. I left the guest key on the hook by the back door. Didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye. He never called to ask where I went, didn't send a single text. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This had been the plan all along. But I had a plan too. And while he'd been playing poker with my kindness, I'd been laying down cards of my own. 3 weeks later, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed a number I didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end was familiar. "Hey, Rick," said his neighbor, a kind man who'd borrowed my snowblower more than once. "Everything okay with you two? Saw a county vehicle parked outside the other day." I smiled to myself. "Just spring cleaning," I said. What he didn't know, what nobody on that street knew, was that the county vehicle wasn't a contractor's van. It was a process server, delivering a court-ordered notice of property reassignment. The papers had been filed. The clause invoked. My ledger airtight. Bank statements printed. Repayment schedule documented. Notarized signatures all in place. The house, the one I'd mortgaged my future to help him get, was now being legally contested for reversion. He tried to stall, of course. Filed motions, hired some cut-rate lawyer, sent emails laced with guilt and manipulation. "I thought you said family came first." "Why are you doing this to me? You know I was going to pay you back, right?" But I'd heard every one of those lines before. When my wife was dying of cancer, he said he couldn't visit because work was swamped. When I turned 65, he skipped my birthday because he had a networking event. Family to him was only family when it was convenient, when it cost him nothing. I didn't reply to his emails, didn't argue, didn't threaten. I just waited, because the hearing was coming. And this time, I wouldn't be sitting in the background, swallowing my pride. I didn't expect him to show up at my motel, but he did. Pulled up in that shiny black SUV like nothing had happened. The headlights washed across the cracked parking lot, catching the chipped white paint of the motel sign and the thin layer of ice on the pavement. He parked under the buzzing floodlight near the office, engine humming, and stepped out as if he owned the night. He was still wearing that smug grin he'd had on Christmas morning, the same grin that had split my chest open months earlier, that quiet smirk that said I was being dramatic, that my pain was an overreaction. He looked like a man walking into a business deal he assumed he had already won. He didn't ask how I was doing, didn't ask if I had heat, didn't even glance at the broken ice machine outside the lobby or the vending machine where I sometimes ate dinner. He leaned against the hood of his car, arms crossed, his coat perfectly pressed, and said, "You really want to go to court over this?" The words hung in the cold night air. My breath puffed white. The motel sign buzzed faintly behind me. I looked at him for a long time, long enough for the parking lot lights to hum and flicker, long enough for him to shift his weight, uncomfortable for the first time in years. Then I said the quietest sentence I've ever spoken. "I already am." For a moment he blinked, like the thought hadn't even occurred to him. Then he gave a short, sharp laugh, the kind people use when they think you're bluffing. You're not going to win, Grandpa. You gave me that house. I shook my head slowly. My hands were steady this time. No, I said. I co-signed it, on paper, with repayment terms. You signed them too. He gave a small, dismissive shrug, still pretending to be calm. You're not going to put me out in the street? I opened my motel room door. The smell of stale carpet and cheap soap drifted out behind me. You put me out first, I said. Then I closed the door in his face. That night, I sat on the edge of the motel bed. The mattress sagged under my weight. The air conditioner rattled in the window, blowing lukewarm air. The TV remote barely worked. The picture buzzed with static whenever I tried to change the channel. Beside me sat my old trusted folder. Thick now, swollen with every receipt, every email, every broken promise and missed payment. Every insult he'd forgotten, but I had carefully tucked away. I rested my hand on it, like a lifeline. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. I wasn't just defending a house. I was defending my name. The court date came 2 weeks later. The courthouse was small, tucked between a diner and a pawn shop. Inside smelled faintly of old coffee and polished floors. The walls were pale, almost the color of worn paper, the kind of place where people usually argue about fences or barking dogs. But that day, something heavier lived in the air. He came in first, slick and confident, wearing a tailored coat and an expression that said this would be a minor inconvenience. His lawyer followed, young, sharp-suited, carrying a sleek laptop bag and the easy arrogance of someone who hasn't yet been humbled. I came in quietly with my lawyer, old-school, gray-haired, with a face lined by decades of patient work. He still carried a fountain pen in his pocket and kept every record in labeled paper folders. His calm presence was the opposite of flashy. We sat down at the long table. The clerk shuffled papers, her nails tapping against the desk. When the file was read aloud, the sound of it filled the room. 57 pages, 10 exhibits, 3 notarized affidavits, a repayment schedule highlighted in yellow, 4 certified letters, unopened, and 1 signed agreement from 5 years ago, with both our names in black ink. The judge looked up, a woman with clear, steady eyes and a voice that didn't need to be loud to carry weight. Mr. Palmer, she said, is it correct that the defendant failed to meet the agreed repayment terms outlined in this document? I stood slowly. My knees ached, but I stood straight. Yes, Your Honor, I said. Have you received any repayment, remedy, or proposal for settlement? I took a small breath. No, ma'am. Just a Christmas card that wasn't a card. Even the court recorder smirked at that. Just barely, but enough. His lawyer started in, smooth as oil, talked about intent, talked about love, said I'd never demanded payment, said I'd lived in the house, rent-free, that this was all a misunderstanding between generations, a family issue that didn't belong in court. He tried to paint me as manipulative, an old man weaponizing kindness. The judge didn't interrupt. She flipped through the pages slowly, methodically. First the signed agreement, then the bank statement showing 5 tiny payments, then the photographs of the fridge notice, the typed eviction message with no signature. When she finally looked up, her tone hadn't changed, but her eyes had. Mr. Palmer, she said, you may be 70, but you have filed this motion with exceptional clarity and documentation. That speaks volumes. Then she turned to my grandson. Unfortunately, your paper trail does too. Silence. You could have heard the fluorescent lights hum. When she ruled in my favor, he didn't look at me. Not once. Just sat there, mouth slightly open, like someone had unplugged his whole personality. His lawyer leaned in, whispered something urgent. He didn't answer. He just stared at the table. I stood, buttoned my jacket. The same one I'd worn to my wife's funeral, the one that had survived too many winters. I picked up my folder, and I walked out. 3 weeks later, a sheriff's deputy taped the notice to his front door. 30 days to vacate. No extensions. The paper flapped in the wind like a quiet flag of consequence. He called me that night, left a voicemail, His voice was tight, angry, almost breaking. "You're ruining my life, old man. I hope you're proud." I listened to it twice, and then I didn't return the call. Because I wasn't proud. I was tired, but I was finally free. He tried to appeal, of course, filed one motion, then another, both dismissed. Because when all you have is charm and confidence, you forget that the law doesn't care about how many followers you have or what car you drive. It cares about signatures, dates, receipts. And I had them all. By the time April ended, he was gone. Neighbors told me he left in the middle of the night. No goodbye, no moving truck. Just his SUV loaded to the roof and gone by dawn. He didn't even take the wind chimes off the porch. The house sat empty for a while. Quiet, still, like it was holding its breath. I spent that month moving carefully through each room, fixing small things that had been ignored. I tightened the leaky kitchen faucet, repaired the cracked garage step, repainted the mailbox bright red, just the way my wife always wanted. With each nail hammered, each brushstroke laid down, the house felt less like a battleground and more like home again. It felt like breathing after holding my lungs tight for years. A few neighbors asked what had happened. They'd seen the sheriff's notice, the moving lights in the night. I just smiled and said, "He moved." Nobody needed the rest of the story. But inside, I kept the voicemail. Not to punish him, not to gloat, just to remember. Because one day when I'm gone and someone asks how a quiet old man won back everything he lost, I want them to know it didn't take fists. It took paper and patience. The eviction date landed on a Thursday, April 20th. Rain in the forecast. Seemed fitting. I didn't drive over that morning to watch it happen. That wasn't the point. Justice doesn't need an audience. But my lawyer called at noon. "Saw the report," he said. His voice was calm, matter of fact, but I could hear the faint hum of satisfaction beneath it. "He's out. Keys returned. Doors resecured." I just nodded, even though no one could see me. For a long moment I stayed silent, staring at the muted light falling across my motel room's thin curtains. Then I got into my car and drove. Not to the house, to the river. The Fox was still half frozen near the edges. Sheets of ice clung to the banks like they were afraid to melt, edges jagged and silver against the slow, dark water. I parked and sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the current drift beneath the bridge. It was the same place I'd stood after Christmas, the same place I opened that envelope with shaking hands and realized he no longer saw me as a grandfather, only a burden to cast aside. Now it was the place where that story ended. I stayed there for a while, just breathing, windows cracked enough to let in the sharp scent of wet earth and cold river air. Cars passed occasionally, tires hissing on damp pavement. A church bell rang somewhere in the distance, muffled by drizzle. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel angry. I just felt done. I didn't walk through the front door until 2 days later. I let the house breathe a bit, let the space settle. When I finally stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the heavy, hostile silence of resentment. A cleaner one, hollow but gentle. No echo of parties, no footsteps pacing upstairs, no faint music bleeding from a Bluetooth speaker on the counter. Just the quiet creak of the old wood floors under my boots and the low hum of the refrigerator I'd bought 5 years ago when we first moved in. It was like stepping into a memory that someone else had abandoned, a memory I could finally reclaim. And yet, somehow it felt more like mine than it ever had before. He didn't leave much behind. A few shoes in the closet, scuffed and forgotten, a broken coffee maker on the counter, some unopened bills tossed on the entry table with his name printed in bold black letters. On the shelf near the hallway, a single framed photo. It was him and me, taken the day we moved in. I was smiling, hair thinner but still holding strong. He was holding up the keys, grin wide and genuine, before ambition soured it into arrogance. I turned the frame over, no note, no goodbye, Just the receipt from the Walgreens photo counter, edges yellowed from time. I set it back down without a word. Then I started, cleaning, not in anger, not to erase him, just to reset, like opening windows in a stale room, letting light and air return. I scrubbed the kitchen sink until the steel shone, repainted the guest room a soft cream, covering the scuff marks and the faint outlines of furniture he'd moved carelessly. Replaced the bent blinds in the living room, the room where I'd slept on that lumpy couch, night after night, too polite to ask for better. I donated the leather recliner he'd bought with the company credit card, the one he bragged about online. Ordered a new one, modest, firm, American-made, the kind that doesn't squeak when you lean back. Each act felt small but powerful, like taking back a piece of dignity he had stripped away one thoughtless day at a time. Then I called the county recorder's office, asked for a copy of the final deed. The woman on the phone sounded cheerful, unbothered, like this was just another Thursday in paperwork land. "It'll arrive by mail within 5 business days, Mr. Palmer," she said. When it finally came, a thin envelope slid through my slot like any other piece of mail. No fireworks, no ceremony. I sat at my kitchen table, hands steady now, and opened it slowly. A single sheet, my name clean and clear, top to bottom. No joint owner, no lien, no footnotes in tiny print. Stamped, dated, final. I stared at it for a long while. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like silence, finally granted. My neighbor Carl came by that Sunday. He's a kind man, retired mechanic, always smells faintly of motor oil and grilled brats. He knocked once and stepped back, holding a plastic tray covered with foil. "Hey, Rick," he said, shifting his weight awkwardly. "Saw a moving truck out front the other week. Kid moving out?" "Yeah," I said simply. Carl nodded, satisfied with that. He didn't push. "Well," he said, lifting the foil to reveal neat rows of deviled eggs. "Figured you could use some company food. Glad you're back, Rick." I smiled, a small, quiet smile. "Thanks, Carl." We didn't talk about what happened. We didn't need to. I don't know where my grandson went. A few weeks later, someone mentioned a Facebook post. He'd put up a picture of a small apartment in Phoenix. Caption said he was starting fresh. No mention of what happened. No mention of family. No mention of me. And that's fine. Some truths aren't owed an audience. What matters is that the house stands. The porch swing still creaks in the breeze. The oak tree we planted, the one he later cut without asking, has stubbornly pushed new branches toward the sky. The driveway still curves the way it always has, catching rainwater in the same familiar puddles. And I'm in it, not as a guest, not as an afterthought, but as the man who made it possible in the first place. I keep the deed in a new folder now, bright red, easy to find, right beside my will. Everything is in order. No confusion, no room for misinterpretation. The next person who holds this house will do so with both hands, open. No hidden signatures, no silent debts, no strings attached, just wood, brick, and earned peace. It's been 6 months now. The snow's gone, the river's running clear again, dark and slow under the spring sun, and the light comes through the front windows just right around 8:30 every morning. That used to be the time I'd head out for work. Boots on, thermos full, postal bag slung over my shoulder. Now it's the time I pour my second cup of coffee and just sit. No rush, no noise, no weight on my shoulders that doesn't belong there. The house is quiet in a way that feels earned, not lonely. There's a difference, I've learned. Lonely silence aches. Earned silence breathes. I fixed the back fence last week. New cedar slats. Straight and even, the way my father taught me. Built a little tool bench in the garage. Reorganized my old gear until every wrench and chisel had its place. Sometimes I walk the yard with a rake just to hear the gravel crunch under my boots. That sound. It reminds me I'm still standing. I haven't heard from him. No call, no letter, no knock on the door. And you know what? That's all right. Some absences are blessings in disguise. I gave him more chances than I gave myself, more grace than I ever asked for. But grace doesn't mean letting someone break you twice. I used to think forgiveness meant staying. Now I know it sometimes means leaving the door shut, quietly, for good. My neighbor's grandson came by last Sunday. Little guy, maybe 10. Freckles across his nose, knees scuffed from bike rides. He wandered up while I was sweeping the porch. "Mr. Palmer," he said shyly, "you still got that birdhouse you built for the tree?" I smiled. "Sure do." "Could you show me how to make one?" I led him into the garage. The place smelled of sawdust and motor oil and spring rain sneaking in through the cracked window. We spent 2 hours sanding old pine, fitting the pieces together, talking about nails and angles and how sometimes wood just needs patience. He watched every move like it was magic, smiled like it was the coolest thing he'd ever seen. By the end, his hair was full of sawdust, sunlight catching the tiny flecks as he brushed at them and laughed. When he left, birdhouse in hand, he turned back at the door. "I wish you were my grandpa," he said. I didn't know what to say, just smiled, a quiet, steady smile, and handed him the finished birdhouse. After he left, I stood there for a while in the empty garage, hands still warm from the work, and let the quiet wrap around me. Sometimes healing doesn't come from the person who hurt you. Sometimes it comes from someone brand new, someone who sees you as you are, not who they want you to be, not what they think you owe them, just a person, standing in the light, trying to make something simple and lasting with their hands. I still keep the voicemail, the one he left after the court date. Some nights, when the house is still and the wind rattles the porch swing, I play it once. Not out of anger, not even out of sadness, just to remind myself how far I've come. His voice sounds smaller than I remember, angry but brittle. "You're ruining my life, old man. I hope you're proud." I let it play and then hit stop. No replay, no response. You don't need to answer every call. You don't need to fix every bond. Some bridges collapse because they were never built strong to begin with, and that's okay. I've started driving again. Not for errands, not because I need anything, just to drive. I take the back roads, the ones where the pavement is cracked and patched, where trees lean over the blacktop and their branches lace together like fingers. I roll the window down and let the wind carry the smell of rain and pine and fresh-turned soil. The radio hums low beneath it all, some old country station fading in and out. There's something about that sound, the hum of tires on open road, the wheels steady in my hands, the horizon unwinding like a ribbon of possibility. It reminds me that freedom isn't loud. Sometimes it's just quiet enough to hear yourself think again. I don't know what the next chapter looks like. Maybe it's more mornings like this, coffee warm and sun spilling across the table. Maybe it's another birdhouse. Maybe it's teaching a neighbor kid how to swing a hammer or plant a tree. Maybe it's just peace. Whatever it is, it'll be mine. Because in the end, all I ever wanted was a home that felt like one. And I've got that now. Not because someone handed it to me, not because I stayed silent and hoped for change, but because I took it back. Quietly, legally, completely. Some miles you drive alone, but they're still yours. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.